Hello and welcome to Hindsighting, where we discuss all the movies to win the Best Picture Oscar and try to figure out if this picture truly is the best or is time rendered a different verdict. I'm Edward Clow. My guest today is a producer and editor and one of the founders of Raconteur, the Miami-based Emmy and Peabody Award-winning documentary filmmakers behind the Cocaine Cowboys films, and most recently Men of War, currently streaming on Apple TV, and Cancel, the Paula Deen story, which premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. David Cypkin, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Ed. How you doing?
Great. Today we're hindsighting the best picture of 2003, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. From 11 nominations, it also won Oscars for Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Editing, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup, Best Original Score, Best Original Song, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Visual Effects. 11 for 11. It was nominated against Lost in Translation, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, Mystic River, and Seabiscuit. So Dave, before we get to Lord of the Rings proper, I'm going to throw a question to you that I'm throwing to all the guests. And, this first season of this podcast is the 2000s. I think that the 2000s is not the worst decade of movies ever, but the worst decade that I've lived through. And I think there are a few reasons for that. I think, or the reasons for why I feel this way. I feel like independent film, while it's still thriving, there's just fewer and fewer independent films that I like. This is not data. This is all my opinion. I think I could be a little political, maybe not partisan. I think 9/11 really hits the water supply, and I think that there's an industry-wide belief that nobody wants to see anything serious. I'm not blaming George W. Bush for this. I'm just saying I think that there's a belief that people just don't want anything serious. And I think the movie we're talking about today, is fantasy, and another franchise, the Harry Potter franchise, starts the exact same year. And I think that the timing, while obviously not planned because these things were in the can and even edited when 9/11 happens, I think the reason that these two franchises are popular on top of being popular IP might have to do with the state of the world at the time. We'll get to that when we get to that. But sticking with the
I
two
would agree with that.
Okay, yeah. Sticking with, so for me, and I know I had this conversation with you, like around the summer of 2009, I was like, oh, wow, it's 2009. This decade's almost over. And I tried to think about what the best movies of the decade were, and I had to strain. Now, that's not to say there aren't any good movies in this decade or even great ones. I think it'd be impossible to do 10 years of movies and there not be great ones. That would be as impossible as them all being great. But I think that my argument for the 2000s being weak is strongest in the year that we're discussing today, in 2003. Again, I'm not saying there are no great movies in this year, whether we agree that Lord of the Rings is great or not. We'll get to that in a few minutes or over the course of this probably very long podcast. But 2003 aside, what is your thoughts on the 2000s? Do you think my theory is cranky old manish? Do you agree, disagree? What do you think of the 2000s in general for movies?
I mean, I think your theory holds water. I mean, you've got. I think the Pirates movies also started up
this year, 2003.
Yeah, same year. And these are, I don't want to rag on Tolkien or even the Harry Potter series, but it's something. I think these movies are, this is kind of the start of getting into IP land, and getting into kind of these more two-dimensional, kind of binary, black and white storytelling, and and a little bit more escapism, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure there, and plus the Best Picture nominees, is not necessarily a list of the best pictures of that year, certainly. So,
well, it almost never is. I mean, it's rare.
That's
in 1976, it is, but not in any year that you and I have lived through, or very rarely.
Although there are a couple really good movies that were nominated.
Yes, I agree, and we'll get to that later on. Okay, so you tend to agree with me that it was a weak, and I didn't feel this way
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I didn't say this in 2003. I think the main crux of my argument, and I talked about this in previous episodes, but on the off chance that the listeners doing this episode first because they like Tolkien or like Lord of the Rings, which is possible. I think the thrust of my argument against the 2000s, which I couldn't say in 2009, I think the 2010s were very strong. I think there's one year in the 2010s. I'm not going to spoil it because we're going to eventually cover it on the show. I think there's one year in the 2010s that is very, very strong. That's just one year. So
Mhm.
I think just the decade on either side of the 2000s is just so strong. And again, at the end of 2000, in 2009, I didn't know what was coming. I don't want this to be true. That's why I thought it was a great place to sort of start this podcast was in the 2000s, which wasn't even my idea. My second guest host, John Steinfeld, was the one who suggested I start in the 2000s. And I think,
Mhm.
it's far enough away that we have some perspective, but it's not like the 40s that we have no contemporary relationship with. I mean, you
Yeah.
and I
Well,
are
it's also a good thing to revisit, since it's kind of forgettable.
all right.
um,
So let's get on to Lord of the Rings. But before we get on to Lord of the Rings, some stats. The Lord of the Rings trilogy became the most nominated film franchise in Academy Award history with 30 nominations, surpassing the Godfather trilogy, which had 29. But Lord of the Rings was surpassed itself with Star Wars, which has 37. This movie marks the second time in history that the third movie in a trilogy was nominated for Best Picture, the first time being The Godfather Part 3, and it's the only time that a third movie has won Best Picture. In February 2004, it became the second movie to break the 1 billion mark in the worldwide box office revenue. The first was Titanic. This is the first fantasy movie to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. This is the first sequel since The Godfather 2 to win Best Picture. At 11, this movie tied Ben-Hur and Titanic to win the most Oscars in a single year. It is the only one of those three to win the Oscar for Best Screenplay. But conversely,
mm,
of the three movies to have won 11 Academy Awards, it is the only one not to have received a nomination for its acting. This is the most recent Best Picture winner to make a clean sweep, winning all its other awards. So this doesn't count Grand Hotel, which won Best Picture, but that was its only nomination. And boy, I want to get into that in that episode. It is now 5 of 6 films to achieve this. The others are Wings, It Happened One Night, Gigi, The Last Emperor, and Coda. This is the 19th time the highest grossing film of the year won the Academy Award for Best Picture. I'm not going to read all 19. I'll just give you the last few. Sound of Music, Godfather, Rocky, Rain Man, Titanic, just to give you an idea. At 3 hours and 21 minutes, it's number 3 in ascending length, number 94 if you count Sunrise, which we'll litigate in a later episode. It is number 2 on the box office list of best pictures with a worldwide gross of $1.1 billion. So, Dave, we can get to the movie now. I'm sure you rewatched it for this podcast, but what is your
I did.
relationship? What is your relationship with Lord of the Rings? I guess we're really talking about three movies. So just tell me what your relationship with Lord of the Rings period is. Okay.
Well, I mean, I grew up with The Hobbit, and I mean, before I really knew who Tolkien was or Lord of the Rings or anything, but with the cartoon first, and then with reading the book, and I believe that I read the trilogy when they were making when before Fellowship of the Ring was released.
Right.
So I didn't read Lord of the Rings until Peter Jackson, was embarking on this.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, maybe I had seen a little bit of the Bakshi, animated movie, but I wasn't all that familiar with that, and so I wanted to read the books before the movies came out. And it's interesting. And Harry Potter began the same year, and I remember sitting in the theater
Yeah.
for that film. That film, I only got through the first one, and did not and did not and will not revisit the first one or any of the subsequent films. Um,
I think a big part of, and this is a question, I mean, fuck it, I'll just do it now. I am not a fantasy guy. That's not to say that I hate it, that I'm above it. I struggle with it, and when I did my Gladiator episode, a few things in Gladiator, which is not fantasy, but a few things about Gladiator reminded me of Game of Thrones, or rather Game
Mhm.
of Thrones, you know, maybe was inspired by Gladiator and other things. But this is obviously, this has flying dragons and things. So Game of Thrones popped in my head a lot. I can only imagine that George R. R. Martin, was inspired by
Sure.
Tolkien, and Game of Thrones is something I by and large really enjoyed, but I struggled with it in that I just had a hard time keeping it straight sometimes. And I only bring this up because of, Game of Thrones is something I watched more or less when everybody else did. I mean, I was late to it, but I was watching it contemporaneously, week to week, and I'd often have to pause and ask my wife, "Okay, who's this guy?" And like, I think I know who this guy is, and I compare fantasy to Shakespeare in this way. Not that I'm conflating its importance, but on the one hand, everybody's English. Um, every fantasy movie, this one included. I mean, a lot of these actors are English, but even like Viggo Mortensen and Elijah Wood and Sean Astin have sort of nondescript English accents, which were in Gladiators the exact same way. Like everybody in Gladiators English, um, even though all the actors, Russell Crowe's Australian, obviously on and on, So I made that point back
That's
then.
true. Well, it's kind of a given that it's in the old world somewhere,
Right. So,
So it's,
but like Shakespeare, even when an American does Shakespeare, he or she's doing it in a British accent. It just doesn't sound right otherwise, or it's a strike against it. So, um, my so fantasy is something I kind of struggle with, which is why, I mean, there's 97 movies I'm going to be covering that are just Best Picture winners, and this is the one I was looking forward to the least. Not because I thought it was going to be the worst, and not because, but I just, well, on the one hand, I knew I would have to watch all three of these movies, so I did my due
Mhm.
diligence. I had only seen the first one. I saw it 23 years ago, um, and
And
my
you just finished the trilogy.
well, no, but I rewatched 1, 2, and 3. I rewatched
Mhm.
1, and I watched 2, and I watched 3 because I knew this was shot as one thing. It was shot all at the same time. It was not a cash grab. There were 3 books. This is more or less the first time this has been done, other than like Back to the Future 2 and 3, but that's already just the sequels. Like, this was a big deal because it was like 2 years before where uh, we all heard, okay, there's going to be Lord of the Rings, and they're doing all 3 at once, and it's going to come out in 2001, 2002, 2003. So like, it was nothing if not transparent. Like, this was a big undertaking, and Peter Jackson, the last movie he releases before this is 5 years earlier. I think it's The Frighteners, unless I'm very wrong. So he's working on it this entire 5 years, which makes total sense. Um, but yeah, I think the wall that I had to get through was my fantasy is just a genre that I struggle with. And I don't say that as a way to sort of like recuse myself or dismissing this movie, because there's a lot of things I'm going to have to watch on this podcast that just aren't my thing. It's a lot of musicals, a lot of westerns, and I don't dislike musicals and westerns, but I mean, incredibly, almost every genre is covered in these 97 movies. Doesn't feel that way sometimes, God knows. But we really do have everything in these 97 movies if you step back. I mean, we do have a thriller. We do have we do have crime epics. We have tons of mystery, not tons of, we have tons of musicals and westerns and dramas and war movies. And the only thing you could argue we don't have yet is a horror movie in these 97 movies. Something that might change this year. We'll see. But anyway, I want to talk about Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King specifically. Even though we're going to kind of be talking about the whole trilogy, because I know it's tricky with
Yeah,
this movie because
it is very tricky because and you do have to reach back to the books because there is a fundamental question, and that I still kind of ask myself, which is how much is am I criticizing part of the book? Am I criticizing the Lord of the Rings, like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the story, something that Tolkien that's an invention of Tolkien, or do I not like the way Peter Jackson
well,
handled
let,
something,
let
and
yeah, let's go there, because that's actually, you know what? Let's go right there, because I
Mhm.
think that's the big question. How I imagine it's faithful, but I guess my question is, What did Peter Jackson bring to this that wasn't in the books, if
Well,
anything?
that's a good question. And when I see when I see it nominated for all these awards and everything, and I like the first thing I think is that he was rewarded for the scope, just for the undertaking, and
Yeah,
just the completion, and the scope of the vision and everything,
right.
just getting all this done. But in terms of the aesthetic or artistic vision, it's I don't know. I kind of think of Zack Snyder, like, did he bring anything to 300, or
Mm,
did he bring anything to, how much did he bring to Watchmen, which and I like, I like Watchmen, and I like the book, and but I think aesthetically, like, Zack Snyder brought some things, but like, but you're talking about someone like who's, that, like, a lot of it is inherent in the source material, in those examples, and so I don't, I can't say that I I like the films. I go back and forth on them. I like the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
oh, okay.
I like what Peter Jackson did, but and then sometimes I think to myself, well, you know, well, that's how it was in the book. So, and the goal here was to be faithful to to the source material as much as possible. And I
Mm.
understand how that goes. Like, I mean, that's what happened, I feel like, on Bram Stoker's Dracula, where you have these table readings where everybody keeps saying, why don't we bring this back in from the book? And why don't we bring that
Sure.
back in from the book? And, and what you wind up with is kind of a, it's still an adaptation, though. And sometimes I think, maybe, there's a, you lose sight of what makes a good film, and possibly what might make a better film. I think that, I mean, I think it's largely successful, Lord of the Rings. But it does seem a little bit overindulgent, I think, overall.
How so?
Uh,
How so?
I mean, that might be an understatement, considering how many hours the trilogy is, and then and then it keeps going on and on with the Hobbit, but well, I just think, a good example is Peter Jackson's King Kong. There's something else, that we're like,
Yeah.
you know, he loves the source material that he's adapting, and I can see what he's like. Oh, and I love when they're on the boat, and I love the island, and what if the natives were even scarier, and oh, it's like Heart of Darkness when they're on the boat. Why don't we have like 20 minutes, and I'll invent a couple characters, and all they'll do is sit around and talk about Hearts of Dark. It's
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
I
and
think King Kong is instructive here because it was the movie he made right after this, and that I did see that in the theater. I think I saw it opening night because I, like you, am a huge fan
yeah.
of the original, and we both like the '76 even better. But I think with King Kong, I could say definitively, putting aside what I thought about it, I saw his stamp on it because if you look at the
Yeah,
33, the '76, and the
exactly.
'05, I see what he did because I knew that source
Right.
material really
It's
well.
very apparent, like, what he was in love with,
Right.
and what he wanted, the little minutia that he wanted to blow up into whole scenes, and
And that's a
uh,
choice, and I think that's
it is a
fine.
choice,
Yeah.
and I get it, and it's just, I think it was too overindulgent, and I think it was unsuccessful there, and I think it was more successful in Lord of the Rings, and maybe that was the nature of the story. It's almost like a chessboard, and like, you're stuck in the middle of a chess game, and that's part of the game of chess, is like, okay, here's the situation, this army is here and is threatening, Gondor on the flank here, but then you have, Saruman over here on the others. Like, it's a chess game,
Right.
and a lot of that tension, like, kind of works in the movie, in the books, like, for the first, I guess, until the end of Two Towers, really, it kind of holds that tension. I think a lot of, maybe there's a problem with, there's a problem with third films, like in trilogies, overall, or tends to be, but there's kind of a loosening of tension in the third movie. I think, it feels you know, you have this huge battle at the end of the second film, you know,
Right.
and it feels like hopeless right before that battle, and then
Right.
after that, it's such a huge release, and so you know, and it's a huge victory, and all everything aligns at the same time. It just feels like, okay, now we got to go through all this again.
Right.
You know, it just feels like a repeat for the second film.
But it's interesting because one of the things that's interesting about the Lord of the Rings, and having again only seen the first one on DVD 23 years ago, it was interesting having kind of sat this out, what pop culturally I knew about. I knew about Gollum and I knew about Precious. These are things that like trickled to a layman or an outsider. And
Right, right.
I you know, Gollum is sort of a bigger figure in the second movie, but I think Gollum, um it was interesting because a mutual friend of ours had said that he, or maybe you had said this. Someone had said, I think it was either you or Billy Corbin had said at the time that Gollum made up for Jar Jar Binks in terms of being a CGI character that was that felt like a real character. And that was that I heard all about Gollum and just what a quantum leap he, is it a he, that he was
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of just CGI and actors. And looking at it now, the CGI holds up pretty well. I mean, I'm not an expert on
Yeah,
it, but it's pretty solid for
it's
20.
impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it has. I mean, some things, some effects when they age, when they don't age well, it doesn't necessarily take me out of the movie if it's done with intention. Now, some of the battles, I can't even tell you which movie, maybe the first one, was this thing that was very popular in the 2000s of just CGI battles, CGI
Yeah.
soldiers in the dark and the rain, and you can't see anything, and you're just looking at ones and zeros, and there's nothing tactile about it. Lord of the Rings has some of that. I think the battles in the second movie are more
Yeah.
tactile, do feel like guys wailing on each other. So it's kind of a mixture that's interesting. And it might, I mean, somebody with a little bit more effect savvy than me could say like, "Oh, you're really seeing the growing pains of CGI versus practical in this
Hmm.
franchise." And you could even see it, I mean, you know, I don't wanna conflate Lord of the Rings with Harry Potter, but I do think that the comparisons are apt because the first movie in both these series came out a month apart, and I think that, um they're obviously based on, based on very popular books. Obviously, the Lord of the Rings books go back to like the 50s or the 60s. They're very old. Harry Potter was much more contemporary. All the books weren't even written yet. But, everybody knew what these movies were going to be. Both these movies, I have more familiarity with Harry Potter because my daughter's a huge fan. My wife is a fan. I've seen all those movies. I'm not as, I'm only slightly more conversant in which characters are which. But Harry Potter for me is easier to follow because it's tethered to our world. It opens up in, England with this kid in the modern day, and then he goes to this into this world. But even in that world, it's like they're in his school. There's a structure in Harry Potter that for somebody like me who struggles with fantasy, my hand is being held because they go to school. They're in school and they go into clubs and there's teachers and there's bad guys. So like there's this framework. And I'm not saying these things are mutually exclusive. Obviously, everybody likes Tolkien, everybody likes Harry Potter because both these franchises were massive. Harry Potter obviously goes on a lot longer, but like all these Hobbit movies, we have Harry Potter spinoffs. Both these have premium cable shows.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings has one on Amazon. There's a Harry Potter one coming out in a year or two. That's going to be a big thing in my house. So these are these, and there are other fantasy worlds too. There's like Wheel of Time and all these other things, but I mean, you're really talking about Black Label. You're talking about Tolkien, and you're talking about Harry Potter. You're talking, I'm not saying which one of those is bigger, but it's not an accident that both these things are. They would have been hits anyway, but I think I remember my father saying to me, who couldn't give a rat's ass about either of these franchises. But I remember him saying to me before the first Harry Potter movie came out, he really wanted to see it because he thought it was going to be, this sort of, this is 3 months after 9/11, 2 months after 9/11, just something positive. and I think he saw it and just didn't get, just went over his head because he had more of an aversion and
Well, mine too.
yeah, well, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, I think that the timing of it, which again the filmmakers could not have known, these release dates were etched in stone a year before. So I think, and again, I'm not trying to be political, but 9/11 is in the water supply with this entire trilogy. I think I think wanting to go to another world is even more um alluring for people, especially if you're into Tolkien, than it would have been in 1997. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would agree. Um,
So let's stick with Gollum for a second.
okay.
Do you agree? Is Gollum the most popular CGI character ever up to this point? I feel like Gollum is,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
I yeah. And and obviously like Andy Serkis's work,
Yeah.
with the motion capture and everything. I mean, all that was revolutionary.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, not to jump, back to the books, but
No,
I
yeah.
was I remember I remember Gollum like being kind of like, I took him as kind of like this kind of scary monster, like in The Hobbit, for
Mhm.
instance, and then in the book, and then I don't know, I never really appreciated the retconning of The Hobbit. I feel like I feel like that everything's very simple. Everything's like a simple fairy tale in The Hobbit, and in The Lord of the Rings, everything gets like expanded. Where it's like in The Hobbit, it's they're going into the Misty Mountains, and then in Lord of the Rings, it's like, well, it's Misinthildor. That's what the real name of the mountains is, and they just call it the Misty Mountain. And it's just like, okay, you started with like a small with like
Yeah.
a charming tale, and then you retconned all this world building on top of it. The same with the Ring. I like it always annoyed me. Again, just crap on Tolkien, but like,
Right.
it's I'm gonna be I'm gonna be talking real big here for a second,
That's fine.
but the whole idea that like in The Hobbit, like the ring is just like is just what he needs to steal the dragon's gold because it makes him invisible. So it's just like one of these one of these normal fairy tale magical items that he finds, and he has to trick this monster to get it, and it helps him steal the dragon's treasure. That's all it is. And then it's like, no, but did you know that that was the most important ring of all time and has all the power of all these other rings and controls the entire world, and it also happens to make you invisible. It's just like I just this whole thing is like a giant elephant riding on the back of this little charming story
Right.
that like got on sometime after this first story was written, and that like always kind of annoyed me. Like again, I like these movies. I always debate whether or not I'll ever watch them again. So I guess it's kind of a love hate thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, Gollum's an interesting character. I think that Peter Jackson brought the whole Gollum like talking to himself, like the two Gollums, the good Gollum and the evil
Yeah.
Gollum talking to himself, which is a good,
His reflection in the pond. Yeah.
which is a good technique, to kind of, when you got this little monster with an internal struggle going on, how do you film that? And so it's the good and bad Gollum talking to himself, his conscience or whatever. uh, um so I guess that's something Peter Jackson brought to the table.
You
um
know what I thought of, and I hate to make this into like a Kevin Smith movie and bring Star Wars into it, but you did mention Star Wars near the top,
mhm.
just in terms of not so much story and plot, but just in terms of the technical innovation. I thought about Yoda and Empire Strikes Back in terms of what
Yeah,
Yoda
sure.
was in 1980, how was this puppet and how lifelike it was, and what a
Sure.
full-fledged character it was. Because I mean, this is a whole other podcast that probably already exists, but for me, if you're gonna go with like the top 2 or 3 best characters in all of Star Wars, Yoda's gotta be way up there.
Yeah, which is really, I mean, and Empire Strikes Back kind of hinged on it, whether or not his character worked, and
And
which means that basically the entire trilogy hinged on whether or not this little puppet actually, whether or not Frank Oz with his Miss Piggy voice could sell this little rubber puppet walking around, this
right.
Muppet basically, and like and it worked for the Muppets, so I guess obviously the rest is history. But what is interesting in relation to Golem is that if you remember for the Phantom Menace, they used practical effects for Yoda in the Phantom Menace. It was a puppet in Phantom Menace,
I didn't remember that.
and it looked terrible, and like people like commented on how terrible
He was a
Yoda
puppet in
looks.
Phantom Menace because I know he
He was a
wasn't.
puppet in Phantom Menace, and they made him look younger, but he just looked like like a cheap toy of Yoda or something, like, because it didn't look like Yoda. It was like, he wasn't gray, and he was too green. He wasn't gray enough. He didn't have, like, the
Right.
hair was wrong. Like the eyes were too big. They weren't like the Albert Einstein, like, puffy eyes with the wrinkles
Because they
and
made him younger because it's a
because they
prequel.
made him a little young. Yeah, and but in any case, I they got to the point where where they were like, yeah, you know what, let's for the next film for Attack of the Clones, or like, let's go all CGI with Yoda. I think Golem was kind of proved that that could be done.
But yeah, I just wanted to throw that question out about Gollum because I thought that you know, he was sort of the thing I knew most about these movies going into them,
Hmm.
having not seen them. So like his pop cultural imprint, and like everything in pop culture, it's copied, it's parodied on SNL or on talk shows and things like that. So yeah, I kept writing down, you know, this is good creature design, but is this from the book? A movie I thought a lot about, which is a movie I know you like, is a movie called Legend that Ridley Scott made.
Sure,
And there's a clear I now see a clear Tolkien influence on that movie.
sure.
But I think and Legend's not, you know, is almost like a Grimm's fairy tale. It's not a story that like is that captivating. For people who don't know, Legend's a movie that Ridley Scott made after Blade Runner in 1986, I think. The imagery and creature design and makeup in Legend is something that like is unforgettable. Is something particularly the villain, the character of Darkness that Tim Curry plays, who's basically the devil. I've shown people pictures of that on my phone, and they were like, "Oh, Jesus Christ," you
Yeah,
know?
it's the best devil you've ever seen.
Yeah, it really is. It
Depicted,
really,
the best depiction,
yeah.
on screen depiction of the devil.
And what we mean is that like he's red and has horns and
Yeah,
hooves and
giant bull horns, not
yeah,
just not stubs, like giant horns.
yeah. It's just and Rob Bottin did the makeup and for he did the thing and everything from like Seven to the masks in the first Mission Impossible movie. I mean, but
Yeah, and incidentally, like, Rob Bottin's work on Legend, like, that's part of that's kind of part of what I always had in my head when I read about Golem, like in The
yeah,
Hobbit and the books, like that, this scary creature,
right,
and in The Hobbit, like it's in the dark cave. I don't even know if he ever comes out in the light in The Hobbit. So like,
right,
I always pictured like one of Rob Bottin's creatures from Legend, like one of his goblins,
yeah,
or the Meg, the swamp
yeah.
hag, or something, something scary like that, which is, which I don't know, I like, aesthetically, well, I'm a horror fan, so
Yeah, and I
I
think
appreciate that kind of thing.
yeah,
Gollum's a
I
great
think
character,
it's
whatever, but
I think Peter Jackson's in a funny position that he put himself into because I think this is I think what I struggle with this movie is, you know, did he just transliterate the book and is that his right? I mean, so when Sin City came out, I had not read the book, but a friend of mine, a friend of ours, was a big fan of the book and he would show me, you know, oh, well they took panels and basically they were shooting that movie in like comic book panels. And that movie was a transliteration from the panels of the comic book to the
right.
movie. And that was is it Robert Rodriguez? Yeah. Robert
Yeah,
Rodriguez
and
is and Frank Miller, who wrote the book.
same with 300, Zack Snyder.
Yeah. So I guess on the one hand, it's like if you want to just take the source material and transpose it to the big screen, that's fine. My question is, and we've you sort of touched on this. It's like, well, what are you bringing to it? It's like, you know, what's
Yeah,
the appeal of that if you can't
I
bring
agree,
something
and
to it?
that's and I question that, like I again I look at King Kong, like to you know to to see, like, what exactly, what exactly is Peter Jackson bringing to the table, and I think there's a lot of repetition in the movies, and
Yeah,
as a director, that starts to, that starts to raise the question, like, how, and okay, well, that's how it happened in the books, okay, and I understand, there, I read the books, there's a lot of repetition, there's
yeah,
a lot of fight with orcs where suddenly a wall breaks down and hundreds of orcs fill the room, and and their swords are immediately, their blades immediately flash glint, in the light, and they're all fighting. This happens again and again, and also, but the question is, how many times that work dramatically in a film, like in the structure of a film, you have a 3-act structure, in a film, and like, and how many times, it reminds me of, like, in Jaws, like, when Spielberg said he got a scare, with the, with the head, of Ben Gardner under the boat,
hmm,
and he, and then he lost the scare later on because he put this, because he put a scare earlier in the film.
right,
So when the shark popped out of the water, there was less of a scare because, because the audio, it's like, it was repetitive. It's like, I'm not going to keep jumping here.
right.
It's like, you feel like that's what the audience is telling you,
My daughter
and
had that same response to Jaws. Like she had such a big jump to the Ben Gardner
Mhm.
thing, and then the second
Right, and then,
one,
like, half the jump, right,
yeah,
for the shark popping out of the water with Roy Scheider, and I think, I mean, whatever, I think, I think those moments, both of them work. But in
yeah,
any case, in terms of this repetition stuff in Lord of the Rings, I think that I've questioned, I've thought, like, maybe sometimes, how would these movies have worked as a series,
right,
which is now much more popular. It keeps occurring in these movies, and it happens in Return of the King again, and a number of examples where, like, a character, like, all the characters think another character died, or a
yeah,
character is about to die, and all of a sudden all the diegetic noise cuts off and everything goes into slow motion,
mm,
and the Howard Shore music gets really sad, and and you see the person, the would be, the would be soon to be dead character swinging the sword in slow motion, and his friends with tears in their eyes, and oh my god, and the music swell. It's like, how many fucking times are we going to fall for that? Like, it's like Home Alone. It's like the seventh time they fall down the stairs and all the kids are still laughing, but, like, I just, it's just not amusing to me. My baby laughs, the 15th time I do peekaboo, he's still laughing. He's laughing even harder. But, like, it doesn't work in a, in an
right,
Oscar winning film. I just, I think Return of the Jedi, had like had like real character stuff to resolve at the end,
sure.
which kind of, it has some of the same problems as a third act, as a third film in a trilogy, but,
But
like,
Luke and
the same
Vader had
resolution
to.
problem.
You knew that confrontation between Luke and Vader was going
Exactly.
to be juicy.
Vader redeeming, Vader, like, saving his son, is like, it was unexpected. I mean, in my opinion,
Yeah,
it was unexpected. And, even though I know the movie by heart, but it's still, I still think it's very effective,
yeah,
and it's, and then you realize it's like, it's because it's his son, and he can't see his son die,
right,
and it redeems his character, and then, that, and then you realize, oh, this whole story, this whole character arc is suddenly resolved,
right.
and you're like, I get it. You don't necessarily see it coming. I mean, even if you think, like, that's, he has to be. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you expect him to be redeemed or not. But in any case, I feel like that, that kind of tied everything together. This is more like a myth. Lord of the Rings. It's more superficial. It's more surface. It's there, what's happening. The magic is dying, the elves are going away or
Mm.
whatever, and the end of the third age, like it's the end. They tell you right in the beginning, which is my favorite part of the trilogy. Just the um the elf, what's her name, Galadriel, maybe that's her name.
Kate Blanchett's character.
Yeah, where I mean, I think she's the first voice in the, she narrates
The very
the
beginning of the
beginning of the
first
film
movie.
where,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
the world has changed and it's so dark. And the mysterious ring theme, and,
Yeah.
and just all is lost. Like that's one of her first lines, like the world has changed, all is lost.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so dark and apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And when you realize like everything is going to die, but it's like the death is also a beginning, and so and so by the end you realize, yes, everything's changing and everything's coming to an end, but an end is also a beginning. It's also the dark crystal uses that. Another heavily Tolkien inspired,
Absolutely.
story and film, both aesthetically and production design and story. The
But again,
Brian
creature
Froud
design,
designed.
that's original creature
Sure, but
design.
also
Yeah.
but also Brian Froud, who's a famous Tolkien illustrator,
Yeah.
designed Dark Crystal. So like you see a lot of the, the
Yeah.
kind of that imagery in the Dark Crystal, but it's also story wise, the Great Conjunction, the end of, it's the same as the end of the Third Age. All this magic is coming to an end here.
Right.
And and what's her name, Ogra
Yeah.
in Dark Crystal says, it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world or the beginning.
Right.
Like it's the same thing. And so you see that at the end of Lord of the Rings. And so the resolution, this movie infamously, I think, like 17 different endings.
Well, let's get into that
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's the other than Gollum, the only other thing pop culturally that trickled down to me as a layman was that this movie had so many endings. In fact, at the Academy Awards, Billy
Yeah.
Crystal was a host. He says it's got 11 nominations, one for each ending. And I mean, we're jumping around. Like I wrote in my notes, like, no kidding about these endings because I thought like, okay,
Yeah.
it'll have like an epilogue and a kind of thing, but it really did just go on and on, and then like, um, there's a line somewhere near the ending. I wrote this down. This is a quote from the movie. There's room for a little more, and I wrote "fuck you." Like, I was like, this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like when he's sitting. I also wrote like, is everybody coming into this room when Sam wakes up? It was just like,
That annoys me. Like and again, that's Peter Jackson as a director.
yeah,
Who else?
it's
Who else do you blame for that? Yeah, what, you have to picture in your head what's going on here. It's like, is everybody lined up like it's a game show or something? Like, like this is your life or something, and they're all in a green room waiting to
right.
come out. Like Frodo just woke up, and like, they all happen to like be lined up there, waiting to pop out and do surprise. It's just things like that.
If they were all in the room like the Wizard of Oz, like gathered around the bed, that would have been more plausible. I mean,
at the level, what the whole thing is at the level of Wizard of Oz, which is that, that it's like, it's just a little bit too it's a little bit too unreal. You know what I mean? But
right.
like where it's a little bit too much of a deliberate fantasy in that, in that sense, where it's not, where it's like, but at the same time, the movie's so kind of, the intent also seems to be visceral. Like,
Right.
It seems to want to be, to have a lot of verisimilitude and be, kind of grounded in reality, a very real feel, even though it's about a bunch of magic and, and a myth and a fairy tale and all that. And, but like, so there's some moments where it feels like it doesn't work. Like maybe, like, okay, maybe the intention was for this to feel kind of like a fairy tale, or something. And but if I'm in a mode where I'm treating these as real people, and this is like a real, kind of grounded world, like this is not really working for me at the moment. At the moment, that's a directing. And I mean, look, this is the trilogy. I mean, just doing one of these giant movies, like had to have been completely exhausting and very difficult to keep your head around.
Sure.
And, and just to keep a unified vision, like, and and tone and everything. I like, they say like that making a film is like running a marathon, and
Yeah.
making a series is like running until you die, until you drop dead.
Sure.
uh, and this is like the latter, because this is like three epics back to back, like nonstop, it must have felt like some sort of some sort of punishment, like he was probably wondering what circle of hell he was in, where he was like stuck in the same movie for for years on end, with no end in sight. But it's just sometimes it just doesn't work, I think. And another example, I think I jotted it down while I was rewatching it, when what's his face, the elf, he when he gives the sword to Aragorn, um, it just it wasn't very well directed, that
Mm.
moment. He like pulls the sword out, and it's like they're into having a conversation, and then he's like, "And you'll need this," and it's like in slow motion, the sword comes out, and it's like the music goes, "Ah," and he's like, "Oh, you know, whatever, Mithrandil, and or whatever the name of the sword was, and the names, it's like, and again, not to crap all over Tolkien, but like I think of like Mystery Science Theater 3000. They're watching Cave Dwellers, which is the low budget, like
Right.
sword and sandals movie, and they're like, why, Joel, why does everybody have all these crazy names in this movie? And it's like, well, you see, they don't have a very big budget, and so they have to dress everything up with all these, so everything is like, you know, uh, you know, Murthrin Thiftonstone, keeper of the seven keys of Thantuzler, and it's just like, I get it, like, I'm not going to memorize all that.
Going back to the ending thing, I felt like, again, experiencing what I'd heard that like this thing has so many endings. I felt like the moment toward the end that I thought worked really well was where I think his name is Aragon. Viggo Mortensen's character says, "You bow to
Mhm.
no one," and everyone bows down in front of them.
Yeah,
I thought that was a really strong ending, and then when it kept going, I was like, "Oh, are you kidding me?" Like, because that would have been like a
right.
really, and we can name 1,000 movies that go on a scene or two too long that have nothing to do with fantasy. I mean, that's like a
Yeah.
genre almost unto itself. It's like, oh, this should have got you. I mean, great movies. I can name movies that are great that just overstay their welcome by just a few minutes or one scene. I mean, that list is too long to even go into, but fill in your movie in your head here. So this is
Well,
by no means.
this is source material worship, and it's just like it's the cousin of temp track love, like
Yeah, but the thing is this. I guess here's my question though, and I know you don't represent all Tolkien fans, but these movies were successful, and there was no social media then. We were like still fairly early internet. I mean, we're like less than a decade into the internet. There's no social media, but I mean, these movies seem to be by fans beloved. I mean, I don't hear any of
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
it's interesting, and Harry Potter's the same way. I'm sorry to keep conflating them, but I do think that the only thing negative I've heard about Harry Potter, again being the father of a Harry Potter fan, is that they're doing this show now where every book is going to be its own season of like a
Hmm.
premium prestige TV. And I just heard, oh, now they'll have more room to do more things to, because they cut things out. But we were talking about Star Wars earlier. Someone told me this expression that I love is that nobody hates Star Wars as much as a Star Wars fan. And regardless of wherever you fall on the prequels or 7, 8, and 9, you heard maybe more than any other franchise just the complaining, whether I agree with it or not. We're not going to litigate all that. Lord of the Rings doesn't seem to have that, at least on a grand
No,
level.
I mean, uh, it's a little bit. I think people grant a lot more leeway, with book, adaptations. With Lord of the Rings, it's also there's a lot of there's a lot of distance there between between the books being written and and these adaptations,
Just
and
time wise,
I
you
think,
mean?
yeah, I think time wise,
Right.
and and as far as adaptations go, pretty faithful.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that the fans,
whereas
yeah,
Star Wars, everybody understands that, like, everybody understands that there is no source material,
right.
and that and they're upset because they're like, hey, I could have come up with something better than this. I questioned, like, the melodramatic, like the melodramatic emotion of the trilogy. I also question, like, I thought the end of Fellowship of the Ring, like, where Sam is crying and Frodo's crying, and they just parted and then they're going to come back together,
Yeah.
and they're crying on each other, and then they're going to go off together. Like, I think it's very nice, and and sometimes that works for me. But also sometimes I kind of think that, like, there's a lot of Peter Jackson trying to have his cake and eat it too, which is what I thought the real problem with King Kong was.
How
With his
so?
next adaptation. I like because, well, for instance, all these near misses where characters almost die, that's having your cake and eat it too. I want the emotional arc of a character dying,
Right.
but I don't want to kill off the character. I still want to use the character.
Uh-huh.
Like, you have to respect that George Lucas, for all his problems as a director, Lord knows, and a screenwriter,
Mhm.
or certainly dialogue screenwriter. That in the first Star Wars film, he had the wherewithal, and the perspective. He had the wherewithal to kill off Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
It was like, because just for the sake of story, and he says that he killed him off because he had nothing for him to do in the third act.
Yeah.
And like, and you don't, and again, this is all in Tolkien. So when I, like, but you certainly don't get that in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's like they've got everybody, sticking around. Like, they even kill off Gandalf and bring him back. But, like, but I mean, again, Tolkien, does that. But and and the Balrog and everything, that's a whole other story. But
I think that the 2003 might have been one of the last times where there's no social media yet. So with Peter
mhm,
Jackson, if he had diverted in some significant
right,
way,
right. It
I
was
think pre-social media,
pre super fan
super
backlash.
fan,
Yeah,
the fans having any power,
absolutely.
and I'm sorry to keep tying things to Star Wars, but I think it does thematically. I had said, maybe 5, 6, 10 years after episode one had come out, if there had been a social media in 1999, if there had even been like a highly functioning internet, episode one would have opened just as big. It was probably the most highly anticipated movie ever. You can certainly make that argument. It was the
Hmm.
first Star Wars movie in 6 years. The anticipation for it was through the roof. I
Sure.
think if it comes out in 2025, I think social media and fanboys, and they're mostly boys, would have seriously hurt that movie's second, third weekend. And I think Lord of the Rings, if any zag had been done,
Hmm.
that that I started to keep harping on this, but I think 2003 is the last time you really could
Yeah,
do it, which might be an
yeah, I
argument for the
agree. Yeah,
2000s being better than I think.
mhm. I think I actually enjoyed the film more than I enjoyed it the first time. I think
Yeah,
rewatching it.
yeah, I guess for
Um,
me, because I guess I really haven't said, I think for me, just to kind of, pivot onto the next part of our show, but I think,
mhm.
I do have to look at this as a trilogy. I don't think looking at a trilogy is cheating because it was shot all at the
No,
same time and it was conceived that way. So it's not like
yeah,
talking.
particularly this trilogy.
Yeah, which is not true of really anything else. I mean, you could say that
No,
about Back to the Futures 2 and 3 maybe, but not the first one, So, I think this movie is sort of a one of one in that, you know, it was, you know, they did all 3 at once. I think it coheres for all its flaws. It
Hmm.
doesn't it does feel like one story split into 3, which I imagine is how the books are. So, I think, I definitely admire the technical craft that went into it. Whether the book was transliterated or not, I can't speak to that. You're shedding
Hmm.
a lot of light on that. Um, I definitely an admirer of Peter Jackson's. I think I was able to appreciate more what he brought to King Kong, putting aside what I thought of it because I just know King Kong really well. And I think King Kong is something, you know, we've had a King Kong versus Godzilla or a Kong on Skull Island. We haven't done the original King Kong story again. I'm not, it's only been 20 years. I'm not saying we need to, but I think King Kong, or really any story that goes back that far is like Shakespeare. It's like, what do you bring to it? You're going to do Hamlet, fine. What are you bringing to it? When is it set? How are you doing it? But I digress. I think that this is something I admired more than I enjoyed. My struggle with it
Hmm.
is, am I just not a fantasy guy? Do I recuse myself for that? Or is it incumbent on the movie to pull me into a genre? Because I've been pulled into musicals. I've been pulled into westerns. I've been pulled into rom-coms. I've been pulled into these genres that I don't typically visit. So that was sort of my struggle with this. That's why I wasn't looking forward to it. I'm very glad that I've seen it. I definitely think this is a huge moment in cinema history, whether the effects of this are positive or not. I think Harry Potter's a similar thing, but Harry Potter, they were still writing the books, they were conceiving those movies, so it's a bit more like a traditional franchise in that they were waiting for the IP to be done. Uh, so this is different because these books were decades old by the time we get to this first movie. So yeah, we'll get into whether I thought it deserved to win in a minute, but I want to talk about something specifically that I have a very definite idea about. So
Hmm.
why do you think, putting aside whether it deserved to, why do you think Lord of the Rings, this movie, won Best Picture? Why was this a victor on Oscar night?
I think I kind of equate it to when The Departed won Best Picture. I kind of see it as I kind of see the award. It's an award for a body of work rather than just the film.
Okay.
And The Departed's another story. I feel like it's one of the less deserving Scorsese films. But in this case, I don't know if Return of the King was the best of the three. Um,
Interesting.
I think that's debatable.
Which one would you give it to? If you have to give it to one of the 3, which one do you give it to? Forgetting what it's against, just you have to honor one of these
Yeah,
movies.
I mean, in the theater, I enjoyed the second one the most.
Okay.
I like, I don't. I don't know. It's similar to The Empire Strikes Back. I think as the second act is, you know,
Sure.
always has the most conflict,
Sure.
I think that I think that's the case here. But again, it's so these movies are so close together that it's difficult to even draw those lines between them. I mean, even that the scene with Saruman in the beginning of the third film, I think I heard that was supposed to be in the second film,
Right.
but that like they felt like, oh, we don't have any place to put it in here. Well, it kind of felt like they didn't have any place to put it in the third film either, but they had to put it somewhere. So and if you have to divide these things up into three act structures, then it's got to go somewhere. Um, to one of the act's detriments. But I think I just I in my opinion, it's an acknowledgement of the full body of work, and that's fair. At least Mystic River didn't win.
Well, that's tipping your hand a little bit. I actually, this is something that I thought about way back, 20, in 2000, in 2003, 2004 when the awards were going on. Uh as far as why it won, having not seen it then, but now having seen it, I don't think my opinion has changed. Um I call it and I said this back then, to me, it's the Mayor Goldie Wilson effect. I feel like when the first movie came out, it was nominated for Best Picture and it didn't win. It won a few things. It didn't win Best Picture. I remember just anecdotally people saying, oh, well, the third one is going to win. And that's going to be like the whole trilogy winning. And to me, it was like, Mayor. That's right. I'll run for mayor. And to me, it
some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, or
it's not just because somebody said that it happened, but I think there was a collective, maybe industry wide understanding that like the third movie, they're going to honor the third movie for Best Picture, which will be like honoring the whole thing, which kind of echoes what you're saying. There's a
well,
theory that might happen with the next Dune movie, that
you
the
know,
next Dune could be like this.
in all fairness, these films don't hold up by themselves. They're not standalone films, and
Right.
I mean, Star Wars in 1977, that was a standalone film.
Right.
I mean, the first Back to the Future is a standalone film.
Absolutely.
I thought that was a joke at the end when they said to be continued.
But that was only on
You
the
know, like,
video.
and
That was only on
yeah,
the video. The people we it was a Mandela effect because we all remembered seeing in the theater that it said to be continued. They just put that on the cassette because
yeah, like
Zemeckis had said it was never supposed to be a trilogy, or I never would have put Jennifer in the car because that caused so many problems. So much of two was like, what do we
yeah,
do with Jennifer?
but like these movies are a standalone film. The first Godfather is a standalone film.
Mhm.
It works. It works with that could have been the last word, and that's your
And it would still
in
be
the
a great
Godfather,
movie. Yeah.
and it would have been a great film. And that's just not true of this of this trilogy. By design, and everybody knows it.
Yeah.
And so. So in a sense, I guess, how could you give how could you give an award to part of it? It's like, don't we have to see the whole thing first? Besides, until we can kind of say,
Yeah.
okay, we're giving an award for this whole thing. We can't give you an award when you only release this much of it.
It's
It's
a
like,
very good point because
you know,
if like
I know, we're all pretending like they gave it to the one movie, but
right,
let's actually consider how you think about this film. I mean, you
right.
don't think about it as a film. You think about it as the third installment of this large story.
Also, the movies came out 1, 2, 3 in consecutive years, so it wasn't like you had to wait a very long time.
A lot of times, the two and three are made close together because at that point they realize this is going to be a trilogy. Same thing with Back to the Future and Star Wars,
Matrix,
where they realized, okay, we can
right.
we can set up a lot more problems in the second one and
Right.
then resolve them in the third one, and now we got a trilogy. And like
They know there's an appetite for 3 because there's a huge appetite for
yeah,
2.
but in this case, like that was never not going to happen. That was always the intent, and
Right.
everybody knew it. And I think that certainly factors in whether or not anybody you know wants to admit that, or dispute it. I just think it's obvious.
Yeah, I think it's obvious too. All right. So, categorically denied. Before we get to Best Picture, let's you and I to see if Lord of the Rings was worthy of the other 10 Oscars it won. So we're going to go through, we're not doing Best Picture yet. We're going to get to that in a
Okay.
minute. We're going to go through the other categories. We're going to start with Best Director. So Peter Jackson wins Best Director. He beats Fernando Meirelles for City of God, Sofia Coppola for Lost in Translation, Peter Weir for Master and Commander, and Clint Eastwood for Mystic River. So of those directors, of those movies that you've seen, would you give Peter Jackson the Oscar, or would you give it to one of these other 4 directors if you've seen any of those
Um,
movies?
I mean, I thought Lost in Translation was beautifully done. I mean, that could have been a movie that you know that could have been a movie that felt like it was about nothing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so it's not. It's I think it's a really I haven't seen it in a while, but and maybe by virtue of the fact that it's such a close adaptation, it's like I don't feel like he brought a lot to the table, aesthetically. So I think that this is like an award like about scope and
Sure.
and yeah, and just accomplishment.
So let's move on to art direction. It beats Girl with a Pearl Earring, The Last Samurai, Master and Commander, and Seabiscuit. I haven't seen any of those. So have you seen any of those? And do you think it's deserving of art direction?
um, what is Master and Commander is on the list?
Master and Commander is on the list.
Yeah, I mean, Master and Commander was very good. Again, this is a scope thing.
Right. Okay.
And like Master and Commander is excellent. It's perfectly recreates a ship of war, a man of war in the Napoleonic era. It's that's I think Master and Commander is a fantastic film.
Actually, I have to go back. So I didn't talk about my pick for director. So you don't have to do your
Mhm.
part again. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, for director, I actually think just looking at things directorially, I think Fernando Mariellis, if I'm pronouncing that right, the City of God, I thought was a really vibrant, very inventively done movie.
Yeah.
I think I responded more to that directorially. I think Sofia Coppola, it's such a different thing. I think that just looking at that directorially, it's obviously a totally different movie. I know you're not a fan, but I also think just Clint Eastwood, Mystic River was kind of a different thing for him. And I think that so I'd put probably those three above Peter Jackson. Um, but yeah, I agree that just the sort of the commanding of just the production of it is impressive. And I want to take this opportunity to say that like I do admire Peter Jackson. He made a documentary about the Beatles that was on Disney Plus a couple years ago. That is literally 8 hours long, and I was like, wait, it's over? So I think that Peter Jackson, like Robert Zemeckis, is gotten very good with technology because like a big thing he did on the Beatles documentary was just recolored the footage, but it just to make it look like it did back then. Like he did a lot of technical work on making the Beatles come alive that didn't change anything.
Mhm.
So I think that, and I like the Frighteners, and I
It's
think
almost a
that
good way to describe what he did with Lord of the Rings.
zing. Um, as far as art direction, I mean, yeah, I think I think the Lord of the Rings movies are formally very beautiful. I'll just default to I don't know what he took from the books and what he brought to it, so I'll just defer to you on that. Costume design, it is up against Girl with a Pearl Earring, The Last Samurai, Master and Commander, and Seabiscuit. So just focusing on the costumes, is that another thing that you feel was just from the books?
Yeah, it seems. I mean, it seems obvious. You look at the list, and I mean, think how many costumes are in Lord of the Rings.
Right. But the
um,
design, do you think the design is something that he and his costumer brought to it, or is that something that's in the
well,
drawings?
sure.
Okay.
I mean, it's a book, so I mean, there's a history of illustrations. Obviously, like again, Brian Froud, like is a
Right.
there's a number of Tolkien illustrators who have kind of visualized the world, and I think I think that it was very the films are well done. The production design is well done. The costumes are well done.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
I agree with that.
and
I can't compare it to these other things. So editing, it is against City of God, Cold Mountain, Master and Commander, and Seabiscuit. So of what you've seen there, I mean, this movie's really long, so editing is and it has 11 endings,
yeah,
as we've
well,
said. So
arguably could have used some editing. You know what? It's maybe again, there shouldn't be a dozen endings, but yeah, that's how the book ends. Where like it's like a
right.
curtain call for all the characters and all
That's what I thought when I was watching
and
it. It was very
yeah,
curtain
it's like the end of a
cally.
play where
Yeah,
everybody's like how many encores are there going to be and how many times and the whole
sure.
cast has come out and then
Right.
and then every so this is the exercise. You could love it or hate it. I think that you know I, it seems like again this as an editing exercise. Massive undertaking. Like
100%.
in
Yeah.
terms of the amount of material shot. For this film and the number of effect shots
Yeah.
and everything like that. That's not strictly editing when you're talking about effects, but that is part of it. And it's a giant technical exercise. And again, that's obviously, in my opinion, what part of what the award goes to
Yeah.
is the scope.
Yeah, I'd say for editing, I'd go with City of God because I thought City of God
Hmm.
again when I talked about with director, it's just a very. Do you know that movie, City of God?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
I think again that's a movie that's like very frenetic, very
Yeah,
fast, very
absolutely.
inventive, breakneck, and yeah, I
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't mind having seen City of God.
when editing,
When
yeah.
when editing, certainly.
Makeup, it's against Pirates of the Caribbean and Master and Commander. I thought the makeup in this was really good. I mean, as far as the creatures and stuff, so I'm fine
Yeah,
with that.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Score, it is against Big Fish, Cold Mountain, Finding Nemo, and The House of Sand and Fog. Uh, I don't really have a strong opinion about this. I mean, as far as what it's nominated against.
Yeah, I look. I mean, the Howard Shore score is strong.
Yeah.
It's not. It's. I mean, it, I don't hear anything else in that category that jumps out to me.
Best song, I really don't give a shit. I don't know what it's against, so we can just skip that unless you
Mhm.
object. They just slapped the song at the end. It just, sound mixing, it's against Last Samurai, Master and Commander, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Seabiscuit. I mean, I guess sound mixing wise, it's fine. I don't really have a strong opinion.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, honestly, if you watch Master and Commander, there's a battle in the opening,
uh
and I mean, if you want to notice the sound design, that's a
so that's your pick
that's a good
then?
place to start. I mean,
Yeah, that's cool.
I would probably.
Go
I
Master.
mean, I would have been satisfied with Master and Commander winning that.
Okay, that's
Certainly with Master and Commander winning something, and
yeah.
that would certainly be as good as anything else to win for.
Two more to go. Visual effect, it's against Master and Commander and Pirates of the Caribbean. Um, I don't know. What are your thoughts, visual effects wise? I mean,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, it's
I
fine.
mean, yeah, and I'll I'll tell you. And oh, we mentioned Pirates earlier. Like as another one of these IP,
Yeah,
franchise. Like, again, one that I didn't appreciate.
yeah,
I feel like the Pirates of the Caribbean was a giant wasted opportunity. But
yeah,
it's like to way to ruin an entire genre.
yeah.
But
Last category for us is adapted screenplay, which we kind of already talked about. So it is against American Splendor, City of God, Mystic River, and Seabiscuit. So against those movies, based on what you've seen, this is something we've kind of talked about this entire pod. Do you think
yeah.
it deserves adapted screenplay, or do you think it just faithfully, as was his wont, transliterated the book? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably not fair entirely without having read all the books
Okay.
uh, as an adapted screenplay. But I mean,
Do you like these other screenplays better
yeah,
that you've seen? Do you like American Splendor, City of God? I know you don't like Mystic River or
you know
Seabiscuit.
what, I really enjoyed American Splendor.
Okay. I
Sure.
guess from these,
Or City of God,
I'd probably go
but
City of God of what's here. All right, Dave, we finally come to the big moment. So, Dave, let's see if One Ring really deserved to rule them all. It's time to test our hindsight with the verdict. So, Dave, against Lost in Translation, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, Mystic River, and Seabiscuit, was The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King the best movie nominated this year?
I think it was a just award.
Okay.
Um, I my personal favorite for the year was probably Master and Commander with Lost in Translation as a close second.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, I'd rank Lost in Translation and Mystic River above Lord of the Rings. Um, as far as the actual award, I'm not quite sure which, but I'm definitely coming down on Lord of the Rings: Return of the King not being deserving of Best Picture. You know, but again, I admired a lot of it, and it's certainly This isn't one of those ones where I'm like angry, like how could it be? Because I think that there's a bit of a disconnect, at least as far as you know, me in this year. What was the best movie of 2003, whether it was nominated or not?
Well, I mean, I think that Lost in Translation and Master and Commander were two of the best films of the year.
Okay.
I feel like it was a sparse year. I mean,
Yeah, I think it's a very
um,
sparse year, and I think that's this is the year.
yeah, it might actually be a fairly a fairly good list of nominees. I mean, considering what came out.
That's interesting.
American Splendor. There was that was one of my definitely one of my favorite films of the year.
Okay.
Capturing the Freedmans came out that year.
Okay.
That was a good film. I wouldn't say it was enjoyable. Um,
Well, yeah.
but yeah, so overall, they were on the money, I think.
My best film of 2003 is Ridley Scott's Matchstick Men. So Ridley Scott took a break from big epics like Lord of the Rings. In that Ridley Scott made movies in the scale of Lord of the Rings, and he took a
Very good.
yeah he took a break to make a big studio con movie. This is something we don't see anymore, which is an argument for why this maybe were better days than I remember. It's a mid budget big studio movie with a big star and a rising star, strong script, and that Ridley Scott actually elevates without his usual flashy tricks. It's definitely a big Nicolas Cage performance, but it's not one to the insane degree that was just ahead. I think it's a really good early-ish turn from Sam Rockwell. And I think that this is where the Sam Rockwell kind of persona arrives. He's definitely a chameleonic actor, but like a lot of his just like fast talking and dancing, like his sort of screen persona, I think kind of emerges in this, even though he's a very versatile actor. Really like Alison Lohman in this. She is in Big Fish the same year. Didn't really pop to anything else. And my understanding is she's just not acting anymore. But I think it's a shame because I think she was a really good actor. I think this is the kind of movie that just wouldn't even go theatrical today. This would go straight to streaming and it would be not the same movie. It'd be at about 70% of its strength. And I think, again, this might be an argument that the 2000s were maybe a little better than I realized because I think a movie like this is just not getting a big studio push. Or if it is, it's getting like 1 week and then going to streaming, even if it's as good as this. So, a movie I liked when I saw it and then kind of forgot about, but in looking over this year, I was like, yeah, this is like the kind of thing I'm always asking for more of, like just
Hmm.
a genre movie from a big studio that, it was kind of a flex for Ridley Scott. He had just done Black Hawk Down. His next movie's Kingdom of Heaven. So it's him kind of, and it's one of the few times Ridley Scott's given a really strong script. Our next category, Dave, is
That's good.
spotlight. This is where we spotlight something from any movie this year. Now it could be a performance,
This year?
cinematography from this year. So
Okay.
we're gonna pick we're gonna pick one thing from a movie this year, even if we don't like the movie. So it could be a performance, cinematography, a score, a stunt sequence, a shot. I mean,
Ooh.
anything.
Offhand, actually, I did forget something from 2003, a film, documentary actually.
Okay.
Fog of War came out in 2003,
Okay.
which I mean, I mean, that's something that that's in my wheelhouse,
Absolutely.
uh, and it's just it's one of my I suppose I don't know, maybe I would put in my top 10 documentaries probably. I think
What is it about
Fog of War.
briefly so people might not
The
know?
Fog of War. It's it's a an interview with Robert McNamara. Just just a single interview with McNamara talking to Earl Morris, kind of covering his role as in the Johnson administration, Kennedy and Johnson administrations, and kind of the lead up into the Vietnam War,
Mm.
and it becomes, because it's him explaining how it happened. It becomes a kind of almost an apologia and a you can kind of see himself second guess. You can kind of see him second guessing himself in real time,
Mm.
and so it becomes a real kind of interesting study in character study. Just seeing him kind of struggle with the choices that he made and whether or not they were the right choices, and that because they got us involved in a very costly war.
Yeah. Good recommendation. So I'm going to spotlight the stunt team from the remake of The Italian Job. So I've stepped in deeper puddles than this movie, but I do think this movie is fun. And the main reason why it's fun is the stunt work, which was coordinated by Ken Bates and Steve Kelso. CG, we've talked about, was already rampant. CGI is rampant in big tentpole movies, but I think the stunt work here, it's real cars, it's really tactile, which felt retro even then. Like even in 2003, it felt like, oh wow, they're using like real cars, like
Hmm.
and now it feels avant-garde. So The Italian Job is a really fun movie. Again, as sort of like heartless as it is. So Dave, where can people find you and find your work?
Uh, you can find us at racontour.com, or that's rakontur, or cocainecowboys.com. I believe will take you there as well. And our current release is Men of War. It's a feature doc about the failed coup in Venezuela against the Maduro regime by American mercenaries in 2020, and follows the Jordan Goudreau, the lead mercenary who plans this coup, and it's kind of this Quixote kind of story about about best intentions and best laid plans. And spoiler alert: Maduro is still the ruler of Venezuela.
Okay, watch out for that. You guys always do such great stuff. So that's it for this episode. Next episode, Suju Vijayan and I will be discussing the best picture of 2004, $1 Million Baby. Till then, looking forward to looking back.